This episode was made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 122 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, with the help of special guest Curtis Chen, we discuss Andrew Stanton's 2012 film, John Carter. We want to welcome back to the show Curtis Chen, the author of the sci-fi thrillers Waypoint, Kangaroo, and Kangaroo 2. Welcome back, Curtis.
Hi, thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you on for what was a pretty interesting watch for me. Which, by the way, if anybody wants to check it out, it's on Netflix right now. Go have a watch.
And it's shorter than The Irishman, let me tell you. As pretty much everything is, honestly. But that's a different topic.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet, so I can't comment. But this movie was pretty long. I will say that. But yeah, I assume must be shorter than The Irishman.
They packed a lot of stuff in there, yeah. We're going to talk about it. But yeah, I feel like they tried to maybe bit off more than they can chew. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but sorry. Go ahead.
It's fine.
I'm really excited to hear what you guys thought of it. I know, I sort of had when I walked out of the movie, I had certain preconceived notions the first time I saw it because I had been hearing about what people were saying. It's spoiler alert for you guys if you didn't know this, but it was bombing heavily. Everyone, that was kind of the narrative behind it.
Yeah.
And so going in, I walked out thinking that wasn't so bad. I'm surprised. And then over the years, I think there's kind of been this small but passionate group of fans who've kind of championed this movie,
right?
For reasons I think we can dive into.
Yeah, shout out to some patrons who commissioned this project. Actually, Ben E, Chris C, and Stephen E, I believe it was. Thank you guys for commissioning this. Hopefully you're enjoying our coverage. Speaking of, we did an episode last week with Curtis on A Princess of Mars, the Edgar Rice Burroughs novel. So if there are any John Carter book fans out there checking this out for the first time, make sure to go back one episode and hear us talk about that.
Wait, wasn't that the guy in the movie, though?
Yeah, he is in this movie.
The whole movie's named after him, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see the Edgar Rice Burroughs character show up. That was a twist.
That was an interesting choice, yeah.
It was a choice for sure, yeah. A little kind of, I don't know, a little corny maybe, but I like where it was coming from. I think it would be a cool thing to do for sure.
Yeah, it certainly made the whole framing device more of a thing. So my personal issue with that was I kept looking at Daryl Sabara and it's the brother from Spy Kids.
Yes, that's what I thought too. That's exactly what I thought.
Is this a sequel to Spy Kids?
Yeah.
Interesting. I had that for so many other actors in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
But
Totally.
for that one, I don't have that touchstone, so I didn't have that problem.
So I want to address the giant white ape in the room.
Okay.
This movie, I believe, earned on opening weekend $30.6 million on an estimated $250 million budget.
Oh my God, I didn't know it was that high.
But I have heard as high as $350 million, including
Lord.
marketing and everything like that.
That's an insane amount of money to spend in this movie.
Yep. I mean, I do think that there was, this was a moment in time where Disney trusted some filmmakers who we can talk about the filmmaker, and there were some shifting marketing departments and things like that. All of these things kind of build up to make John Carter the kind of flop, if you will, that it was. I think there's two major things that people like to point to, and it's the lack of if you're gonna establish a kind of massive franchise, as they were clearly trying to do here. Typically you're going to need some sort of star power to just get people in. So there's that, and then there's also the first trailer that came out. I don't know if you guys saw it ever or anything like that, but it was there was no spectacle to it, which in a movie like this I think people are expecting, and I don't think it really established the fact that it was a Civil War era soldier getting sent to Mars. It was just kind of snapshots of the movie. We can get into why that trailer ended up being what it was, but I don't know. Overall, did you guys think that this deserved to flop as hard as it did? Is it sort of? Do you think that the people who are so passionate about it have a leg to stand on, or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, before we get into it, I wanted to ask you: should we keep this spoiler free early on, in case people are wanting to know kind of general thoughts and decide if they want to watch?
It's been 7 years.
I was going to say,
Honestly,
I wasn't thinking we would, but
Okay, well, maybe let's not get into
I
like
think
heavy
the statute of
spoilers.
limitations has expired.
we can do like a little general thoughts section just to
Yeah.
like kind of get that out of the way and get
Yeah.
our thoughts
Okay.
out,
We'll-
and then
we'll
we can
we'll
go
save
into
heavy
more.
spoilers for like the latter half of the episode. How about that? Okay,
Sounds good.
Yeah. So for me personally, I was trying to figure out like why it bombed so badly and like what in hindsight could have been done to save this movie, and could it be saved? And I think that's an open question. I don't know. But I think a few things you kind of touched on. For one, I think a lack of like a recognizable lead that people could get excited about, I think was tough. Not to mention, also, I think Taylor Kitsch was just sort of miscast in a lot of ways. I think this movie, if it was going to succeed, needed a big beefcake in there. I know he put on some muscle, but I mean, like they needed like The Rock. They needed somebody like 250 pounds, a man-meat out there, who looked powerful. And you think about like Conan the Barbarian that did well in the 80s, right? Like you had Arnold. And this, I think, needed something like that. And unfortunately, Taylor Kitsch just isn't that. And so I think that might have hurt it a little bit. And then, yeah, it seemed like marketing, there was some really interesting mistakes in the marketing of this film. And then overall, I have other criticisms that I'll save. But yeah, Curtis, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think I have two main things. The first one is that I think with a lot of big movies like this, there's sort of like people's expectations and the buzz that all the marketing tries to build around a release can make something seem like a bigger failure than it actually is, right? Because like a $30 million opening weekend, like if you or I like suddenly made $30 million in like 3 days, like that's not terrible, right?
Yeah. But if we spent $350 million to earn $30
right,
million,
and if you've been telling everyone, no, this is going to be like the start of a huge franchise, like Disney's going to make like a John Carter world in Disneyland or whatever, like then it really feels like a disappointment. I feel like just watching the movie now, it's like it's not necessarily badly made. I think there are some choices that weren't necessarily the best. So that's my first point. It's like I think there was a lot of expectation at the time, and maybe James, you might know more about that. And my second point is actually kind of a rebuttal to your complaint about Taylor Kitsch.
okay.
But so in many ways, I do agree with you. Like because we read the novel and we talked about that last weekend. In the book, John Carter is described as like this huge, like 6'2" dude, which was pretty tall back in 1912, right?
Right.
But so I actually have a two-pronged rebuttal. One is that you remember when the Jack Reacher movie came out, the first one, and people were complaining that Tom Cruise was not like a big beefy guy like Jack Reacher is described as being in the books. But obviously, he was able to pull it off because he's Tom Cruise and for other reasons. And also, so one movie that I thought of as I was watching this and getting to sort of the end of it without spoiling anything. It's like, so you remember the movie Pitch Black?
Yeah.
Pitch Black with Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel, yep.
And then they made a sequel to that called The Chronicles of Riddick.
Yes, very much thought of that.
Vin Diesel again,
Yep.
right? So he's like a big dude and
Sure.
he can fight and all this kind of stuff. But I feel like the issue with Chronicles of Riddick was like, did anyone really care about like that setting that much? It's like the first movie was great because it was like a very sort of tight, very tense horror movie with a very specific thing they were doing. And then the second movie was about something totally different and really huge. And like it wasn't clear to me that fans of the first movie were ever going to like the second one.
It's interesting to me because I thought with the Chronicles of Riddick sort of comparison, you were going to go down the name route. I thought you were going to talk about John Carter as being chosen as the title for this film.
I do think that's part of it, because I think they were trying to do a similar thing to build out this huge world, right? Because, going back to the novel, they certainly brought in things that were not in that first Barsoom novel, right? They brought in stuff like the Therns and all this other stuff. Like they actually go down the River Is, which doesn't happen until the later novels. So I think they were trying to sort of build up this big world that they could actually like have a lot of different stories happening. But again, like it wasn't clear at the time that anyone was actually going to care about that.
Yeah.
And naming it John Carter when it's actually about all this other more interesting stuff. And we talked a little about this last week about how like there was a lot of world building in the novel where they're explaining, oh, this is how this Martian society operates. This is how things happen on Mars. And I think that was another place where the movie wasn't able to do, like, they couldn't, like, have 3 paragraphs of explaining, like, why the Green Martians behave this way. They just had to, like, get on with it.
Yeah, and that was, just to talk about my general thoughts on it, I think the name had something huge to do with the marketing and that all of these things jointly were kind of building an avalanche. But so John Carter is like one of the most generic names you could think of, and it doesn't really evoke anything. It's sort of just like whatever you put on John Carter is going to be, which kind of makes sense for the story. It's like an everyman story. Everyman in the fact that like John Carter's just some soldier that gets sent to Mars and he has superpowers because he's a human from Earth.
Yeah.
So like that sort of naming it that, and then the reveal at the end of the movie, which I found interesting, and this isn't a spoiler, it's just that like the title at the end, it goes from John Carter to John Carter of Mars. And I'm like, if they had just named the movie John Carter of Mars, I think people would have been a little bit more on board with that. So that's that. And then to talk to sort of to what you were talking about, Curtis, is like the world and the characters. I think that this movie would have connected with me at least a little bit more if there was any time given to actually showing, instead of like all these heavy exposition dumps, because constantly people are just talking at each other. They're like, this is what's happening, and this is what we do here. And like if there had been moments of like us being able to visually just like take in the culture and understand just from just showing us what life is like for all of these people, the Tharks, and just like allowing us to kind of sit with it and seeing through John Carter's eyes for the first time and seeing them in their natural habitats kind of doing their thing, I think would have gone a long way to making the world feel a little more realized, or sort of like tactile, like something's actually there, something's actually going on. Whereas I feel like it was kind of, on this viewing, I'm realizing that it was kind of like bullet points. Like they were trying to hit the things that happen in the book, and they're like, this happens, this happens, this happens. We're explaining this, and so now we need to go over here, and we need to get this thing. And it just didn't really like have any moments of breathing where we could take in. Although I will say there's this couple of scenes like near the very end where he sort of like looks out at Mars and is like deciding that this is where he wants to stay and he wants to be John Carter of Mars. I felt like maybe those were the only moments that I had to just breathe and be like, okay, we're on Mars, and like he's making a decision. So
my big man theory here, I'm going to touch back on. I mean, I see what you're saying, Curtis, and I totally agree. Obviously, just putting in a Vin Diesel or something isn't going to make a movie work necessarily. I think it was a lot of the selling point of this movie seemed to be like him leaping around and doing these superhuman feats. And when I read the novel and it was explained away as like, oh, differences in gravity give you superpowers, I could kind of laugh at it because it's like, okay, that's a very old-fashioned way to think about gravity, but okay, I'll go with it. Whereas in 2012, to propose that is the case is so crazy to me that, and the only way that I feel like I would kind of buy it is if there's already someone who has sort of a superhuman physique in that setting. And like, I think that would go a little bit more to me, selling this guy who's leaping from airship to airship and like being Superman out here, literally doing a Superman save of the falling princess at one point and that kind of stuff. So it just would have helped a little bit with that. But that brings me around to my other point, as we're talking about reasons why I think this movie struggled. It's 2012. We know a lot about Mars. We know a lot about space travel. And they come out with this movie that seems to propose that there is this whole culture and society living on Mars, And I remember just being confused by the trailers. Like, what are they talking about? And there was no real effort to explain. And like, maybe they could have put something in where it's like, they have some sort of way of masking the fact that this society is on Mars, or it is no longer on Mars in modern day, but this is 100 years ago, and back then there was a society on Mars. I don't know, but whatever it was, the fact that you hit us with this bland name, like you said, James, John Carter, okay, who's this guy? He's going to Mars where there's for some reason aliens there. That doesn't make any sense. There's just so many ways that I was bouncing off of this trailer when I saw it originally. And I remember I had no interest in seeing it. So, yeah, I just felt like you don't want to confuse the hell out of your audience. And I think they do that. All that being said, I actually kind of enjoyed watching this movie. In a kind of a trashy way. Like, it is pretty fun. You can tell that they spent a lot of money on it clearly. It's pretty well made. I have highlights. So I don't want to come off like it's all negative, because I think there is some positives here, for me at least.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to say that hopefully it didn't sound. I feel like I probably was talking about a lot of things that I didn't necessarily think were great in it. But my first time I saw this movie, I kind of became part of that group that was like telling people like it's not as bad as you think it is. Like it's kind of like solid and serviceable for like a sci-fi story. It's nothing you haven't seen before. And, this is before I really knew that, like, it's literally just what's on the page, and, the books influenced all of these other things, all of these other sci-fi stories that we're so familiar with. But I remember walking out thinking I was just so shocked that it was bombing as hard as it was. And I just thought, like, this was at a period of time when Disney, I mean, I guess still today, Disney just, like, typically doesn't put out these bombs. Like, it just doesn't happen for Disney normally. So it was just really surprising. And I have a lot of information that we can talk about that can kind of point towards some of the reasons why. If you guys want to, we can move into the film director and then go from there.
Before we get into it, I did want to mention our giveaway we're still doing right now. Curtis gave us 2 books, his Waypoint Kangaroo and Kangaroo 2, signed copies we're going to give out to our listeners. All you have to do is send us an email to inktofilm@gmail.com with the title Kangaroo in the subject line. That's the code word. And you'll enter to win these books. In addition, this week, Curtis, you're tossing in some codes that we can give out that will give people access to your new project with Serial Box. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Serial Box is doing serial fiction, and the new project I'm involved with is called Machina, and it's about rival companies building robots, AIs, to go explore Mars. So this is like near future science fiction with a lot of technology and interpersonal relationships. It's really cool. So I'm one of the writers on the team, and it's going to start on January 29th, and you'll get a new episode every week. The pilot is free for anyone to listen to, but these codes that we're going to give away will give you the whole 10 episodes of the first season, so that you can listen to or read. There's an app, and you can sort of switch between the two. So all you have to do is sign up for a Serial Box account if you don't already have one, and then put in the code on your account, and it should give you access to all of Machina when it starts.
Cool.
That's awesome.
So we're going to give that out to the winner, who is also getting the books, but then we're also going to give it out to 2 runner-ups, so that if you were close, you're going to get those codes at least, so you can check out something from Curtis. We also forgot to mention last time that this giveaway, at least for the physical books, is limited to U.S. residents only. If you are an international listener and you would like to enter to win the code, you can still do that. Send us in the email, just let us know that you're only entering to win that. But we can't afford where we're at right now with the podcast to be shipping internationally. But we appreciate you understanding that. And we hope you all enter, because I think it's fun to do these sort of giveaways, and we want to continue to do them. So yeah, that's code word Kangaroo in your subject line. Email it to inktofilm@gmail.com.
And since you mentioned the books, I do want to, because I'm brilliant, I totally spaced on this thing from the novels. Like I mentioned, like I sort of use some of the references from Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars novels, but I totally failed to mention that the main ship in the first book is literally named Dejathoris.
Oh, that's awesome.
There you go.
That's a big one. Yeah, and actually, the first book was translated into Chinese and published over there, and they used a different title because Waypoint Kangaroo is maybe not the best title anyway. They're like, no one's gonna know what this is. So the Chinese title is more like Secret Agent Kangaroo: the Deja Thoris Adventure. So it's literally in the title
Princess
of the novel.
Mars is in the title technically.
Public domain, guys. It's all cool. So anyway,
Nice.
now we can move on.
All right. Oh, I also wanted to shout out Emily Ceveda. She is doing a book launch right now while we're recording, and I felt kind of bummed though when I realized that I couldn't make it out to it. But this vicious cure is coming out today. She was our guest way back on our Jurassic Park episodes. So shout out to her, and if you're enjoying those books, definitely check out the third one. Or if you don't know what they are, look into them. This Mortal Coil, This Cruel Design, and This Vicious Cure. I believe are the three, right?
Yeah, Emily's great. Her books are awesome.
Congratulations to Emily.
Yeah.
All right, James, I think we're ready. I want to know all the backstory. What
here we
went on
go.
with this movie? Yeah.
Here we go. So the film's director's name is Andrew Stanton. He's an American film director, screenwriter, producer, and voice actor based at Pixar, which he joined in 1990. His film work includes co-writing Pixar's A Bug's Life and also directing Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, its sequel, WALL-E, and live-action Disney's John Carter, which we're currently talking about. He also co-wrote all 4 Toy Story films and Monsters, Inc.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was pretty involved in a lot of Pixar stuff.
Yeah, a lot of those Pixar movies are great. So, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's
what went
controversial to
wrong?
say. Well, let's find out.
So if this had been a Pixar movie, like fully animated,
Yeah, there you go. That might have been a way to save it.
that might
Honestly,
have been,
so I mean, to jump the gun a little bit, he was not accustomed to live action film directing, and sort of the people point to that, and I think he even admits it himself that he was very accustomed to sort of the revision process in an animated film and the smaller, the things that you can change on an animated film that don't require $500,000 a day for an entire film crew to shoot and reshoot and do something differently and change. So the process that he was accustomed to is Pixar's process, which if you're not familiar is sort of write it and animate it and rewrite it and reanimate it until it works. And it's done them very well over their run. Pixar's, got to be the most prolific animation studio at this point. And he was in there early. He was also a part of the group that was brought in. John Lasseter also being another one of them, and that guy's a piece of shit, but just to mention, like, I know people know the name and they understand like how powerful he was at Disney and sort of his influence on a lot of the films, and they were very successful under him. That's sort of just like putting in perspective like where this person, Andrew Stanton, sort of like who he came in with was John Lasseter, Pete Docter, John Rampt. Like a lot of these people who directed Pixar films were executive producers on Pixar films. So I mean, it's not like he hasn't made good films before, Andrew Stanton.
Yeah, but I think back to something Luke said earlier. I think the issue of setting, like the movie starts in a different place than the novels did, where they sort of try to introduce you to this sort of fantasy version of Mars that doesn't really exist. But it's not really the same as like you're not starting with a title card that says like long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or it's not like an animated Pixar thing where you're like, oh, clearly like fish can't really talk, so this is fine. We're just gonna pretend that this is what's happening.
Right. Yeah. But instead, they're showing us Mars ostensibly and we're just supposed to buy that this is going on Mars, which is a big ask, I think, in the year 2012.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. I thought this movie was older than it was. I was shocked to see that it was that recent. Honestly, less than 10 years old. I don't know. It's surprising.
To talk a little bit more about like Stanton and his sort of love of John Carter, he had been waiting 30 years for someone to make a movie about this character, John Carter.
Wow.
And basically because of the success of all those Pixar films, he and John Lasseter and some other powerful people at Disney were basically able to leverage making this film and saying like, we want complete creative control. John Lasseter at the time was the head of Pixar, and he convinced a studio chairman named Dick Cook to buy the series for Stanton, buy Burroughs' Princess of Mars series, and basically made the case that like because of the success of these other movies, he's shown that he can direct a film like this. Let him take off with his franchise and have complete creative control. So as a Burroughs purist, Stanton was determined to make the film in a way that completely honored the source material. In an interview with the online movie site Badass Digest, Stanton said that he felt like if anybody had a chance of making this without it being all messed up by the studio, it's going to be him. He said that Disney was afraid of him because they wanted to make him happy at Pixar because like he had brought so much success to them. Quote, he thought, "I should use this for good and make the movie the way I always thought it should be made. If at any one of these points Disney were going to push back, I would have pulled out. It's the best way to buy a car. I don't mind walking away." So basically, he was saying that he was so powerful at the time that he could make this film without Disney's input in any way. And if they had said like, "Oh no, we don't want you to do it like that," he would have just walked on the project. So apparently that's the kind of, from that quote, I'm drawing that's the kind of free reign he was given with this. And seemingly because of all of this, there was someone named Mary Carney who was the leader of the marketing department at the time. And she wanted to start to cut trailers. She wanted to start to create the trailers. And this is kind of how we get back to that first teaser and what went on with that. Because Stanton was used to the slower pace, perfection, if possible, world of Pixar animation, he didn't have anything really ready to give her to start to make the trailers. But the trailers needed to be made because the movie was, that far projected. It was, about a year out or so. So she had to start making the trailers, but there weren't any CG shots that were fully finished. There were, things weren't color corrected. Things just weren't ready to be cut into a trailer. So seemingly from her explanation and kind of his as well, it's not that and she even admits it wasn't that he wasn't prepared and that like he was doing it on purpose. It wasn't like he didn't want to give her any of the footage. It just wasn't ready. So when they cut that first trailer, unfortunately what happened was people reacted to it, and then that kind of became the narrative that, oh, this movie is weird, like it doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. And then the media started running with the fact that it was also costing Disney an arm and a leg. It was $250 million movie that seemingly no one was interested in. And so this sort of narrative of, is this going to be a big Disney flop, started to kind of be the talking points for the movie.
I can see that. It seems like, I don't know that you can just say that just because people thought like, oh, this is going to be a flop, that it became one. I think that it's definitely a contributing factor, right? Like
I'm trying to paint the picture like one piece, one little section at a time. It's like, I think the people definitely point to the marketing, and I wanted to definitely do the research to find out if the marketing was to blame, but it seems like it's a mixture of direction, marketing, characters are kind of, they're familiar because all of these characters, all of these big moments have basically been stolen by other sci-fi stories, as we talked about in the book.
Yeah, and I think that's something they should have leaned into, because when this came out, I didn't know it was based off a book. I didn't realize it was based off of this classic novel that so many things had been built off of. If they had put that in the marketing material, like before Star Wars, before this, there was John Carter of Mars, and like it was the thing that influenced everybody, and like I don't know, like tell a story a little bit with it and get us excited about it. Instead, they were just like, "Here's John Carter," and it kind of got the assumption that they were like, "You know what that is, right?" And I'm like, I don't know what that is.
I think that's what kind of the narrative was too. Like I think Stanton believed that, and I think he had some creative control over the trailers. I think he assumed, because in an interview I was reading, he was talking about how like this was his Star Wars, this was his Avatar, was this story growing up. And so I think he had that sort of in his mind as like, everyone's familiar. This is a cultural touchdown.
Yep. Maybe they could have at least said from the creator of Tarzan. I don't know. Say something.
Right. Yeah. Or or to point to the director, they could have said something about Pixar. The fact that he had all these successful Pixar movies, but I guess from what I understand, he didn't want this film to be associated with something that could be seen as kiddie. He wanted it to be more of a serious film.
Interesting.
I mean, that all makes sense, and maybe it explains why. Like, I felt like there could actually have been more humor in it. Like, there were certain elements that they could have been a little more playful with.
if you guys are ready, I think this is a good time to get into plot. I just wanted to mention a couple of little things. Is this movie needed to make like $600 million to actually turn a decent profit, from what I understand. I also was looking at reviews, and it's not, the reviews are more mixed than negative. So I would say like the budget doesn't necessarily reflect the box office doesn't reflect the reviews.
Right.
But if you guys are ready, we can move into some plot here.
Before we get into the plot, I just want to shout out some of the actors that I was recognizing. I also do want to mention Lynn Collins, who plays Deja Thoris, the other lead in this movie. And I don't really have any complaints with her performance, but she was an unknown at the time. And when I was watching, I was like, where do I know her from? Because she looks familiar. So I looked her up, and I couldn't find much in the way of films, but she was in season 1 of True Blood as Dawn, the waitress, who I think she's in like 5 or 6 episodes, and then she dies. And I was like, that must be where I recognize her from, because I did watch True Blood. I don't know.
I can tell you one other thing she was in before this. She was in X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Of course.
Oh my God, that's where I know her from.
Which also featured Taylor Kitsch as Gambit.
Yeah.
In a very small role.
Yeah.
Totally random. So they were in a movie like, I don't know, it was like a few years before this.
Oh man, I've repressed that movie. I try not to think about it.
It wasn't great, but
do you guys want to talk about Wolverine's like crazy CG claws for a second?
Yeah,
that movie is wild for sure.
Yeah, I feel like maybe she was kind of a thing for a minute, and also like Taylor Kitsch was on Friday Night Lights.
Yes.
Yeah, which I never watched, but I know some people do really like. Yeah,
I'm sure that's the reason why he got this role, because I know that show is very popular, and I've heard great things about it. I've only ever seen like part of the first season, but I know like plenty of people who say it's one of the best TV shows for that era.
A lot of people love it, and he played one of the football players, so like
I believe so.
He had the physique already, I think. And,
sure.
He looks pretty snacky in this. Like he's got his shirt off a lot. But the other thing is like this came out in 2012, and the same year, Battleship, the movie, came out.
Oh wow!
Starring Taylor Kitsch and Rihanna. Yeah. But I feel like that was a period when he was sort of on the rise, and people are like, "Oh, he's gonna be like the next big, hot thing," and he wasn't.
Yeah,
but,
they wanted him to be.
He got to be in a movie with Rihanna, so he can go home now, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to hate on him. I think he did an okay job here, and I've seen him in other things where he does a good job. I think he's a fine actor. I just don't know that he's perfectly cast for this role. Like you were talking about before with like wanting a little more humor. That was kind of when I threw out The Rock, and it kind of in jest, but like I kind of wanted this movie to have a little more fun with itself, because it is this old premise that's kind of ridiculous on the surface. If you do a lot more of that sort of tongue-in-cheek humor, and you have a really charismatic lead who can sell that kind of tone, I just think it might have worked a little better. But like I said, I did have fun with this movie. And speaking of casting, I want to shout out that I didn't even know this guy was in this movie until I looked it up after. Willem Dafoe is Tartarchus.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was like, he seems familiar. I think I know who this actor is. I had to look it up afterwards though, which is a shame. He's like a big star, and I think a lot of people didn't know he was in this movie.
Yeah. The voice, he like narrates the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought he was great. One of the standouts, Tartarchus. Samantha Morton is Sola, who, by the way, we'll go ahead and announce we're covering Minority Report next week.
Nice.
And she is one of the 3 psychics in that movie. I forget her name in that one. She's the main one that everything goes down with. I forget her name, but I just thought it was interesting, that connection to she's going to be in our next week project as well. I thought that was fun.
Interesting. I mean, cool little connection there. I feel like we could connect every movie in that way. Every project we do, I feel like we should try to do like the 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Well,
speaking of James Purefoy. He was in Altered Carbon as the ancient vampire guy. Forget his name. I can't blank. I'm blanking on it now too. But the rich guy, and he was in this too. We had Detective McNulty from The Wire as the bad guy. I just kept noticing all these people. I'm like, oh no, that guy Bryan Cranston shows up in the Civil War.
Oh yeah,
with long hair.
That was also in a period of time when I feel like Breaking Bad was the biggest thing in the world at that time, and so for him to be in this movie was kind of him like dipping his toe into the film.
Right.
You know, he'd done films obviously, but it's kind of, I think he was like ready to break out and do some films. I do want to say about Bryan Cranston and just his performance and overall, even after all of Breaking Bad, there's still like mannerisms that he has and the way that he speaks, his inflection sometimes, that reminds me of his character from Malcolm in the Middle. It's just an observation I had, but it's just like, I was like, oh, that's very Malcolm in the Middle right there. I like that.
Love that show.
And he seemed to get the tone of this. Like, he was pretty funny, actually, I thought, in this role. In a role that didn't seem like it was written to be that funny, but he sort of made it funny, to me at least. I don't know. Interesting part. But anyway, I'm slowing you up. Let's get into some actual plot there. I just wanted to shout out some of the many people that I recognized in this movie. You know, also, what is it? The King... What is it? The King of the Wildlings was also in this movie.
He was. I mean, well, Mark Strong as well as the
Mark
Tharn.
Strong, from Sherlock and Kingsman and all sorts of things.
He's all over the place. Yeah, he's
Anyway,
great. Also, he plays like he always plays that bad guy. Like he I feel like he's really really good at that. But I like to see him do other things as well. So, but to get into this synopsis here, so like I was saying before, I have 4 parts here. I'll try to get through it pretty quickly, and then we can just react based on whatever we're feeling.
Okay.
In 1881, after the sudden death of John Carter, a former American Civil War Confederate Army captain, his nephew, Edgar Rice Burroughs, attends the funeral. As per Carter's instructions, the body is put in a tomb that can be unlocked only from the inside. His attorney hands over Carter's personal journal for Burroughs to read, in the hope of finding clues explaining Carter's cause of death. We move back to 1868 in the Arizona Territory, where Union Colonel Powell arrests Carter. Powell seeks his help in fighting the Apache. Carter escapes his holding cell but fails to get far with U.S. cavalry soldiers in close pursuit. After a run-in with a band of Apaches, Carter and a wounded Powell are chased until they take to hiding in a cave that turns out to be the object of Carter's earlier searching, the Spider Cave of Gold. A Thurn appears in the cave at that moment and, surprised by the 2 men, attacks them with a knife. Carter kills him, but accidentally activates the Thurn's powerful medallion and is unwittingly transported to a ruined and dying planet, Barsoom.
Okay. So that's the setup. What are your initial thoughts, Curtis? I want to give you ample time to talk now that we're into the meat of it here with this movie.
Yeah, so, I mean, I have to say, I did see this movie in the theaters when it came out, and had very little memory of it before watching it again. So I did not remember at all that, like you mentioned, they open with that sort of voiceover describing like what Mars is, and like there's this city like fighting another city and all this stuff. So I didn't remember that at all. And then we jump back to, post-Civil War New York. So that part was a little jarring for me, and I didn't remember a lot of stuff that happens in this movie. I'll just say that and move on. But yeah, so one thing I bumped on in this first section was the whole thing where Powell was trying to get Carter to join up with the army to like go do whatever. And it's like, I don't know, maybe that was a thing that actually happened, but narratively, it just felt like, why would you want a guy who hates you to like come work for you? Like he can't be that good that, you're basically going to have to micromanage him all the time to make sure he's doing his job, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I felt like this was this whole kind of side story that gets woven here was their way of trying to skirt around some of the more problematic elements with talking about Native Americans in the book. So I thought that this was sort of their way of being like, we're just going to skirt out on the outside of everything else so that there's sort of like this convoluted reason why he and this other guy end up in a cave together. I
also felt like they used that to like not talk about him having fought for the Confederates, although they pointed it out. But then he was like, I fight for myself. I don't actually care about anyone. And I wondered, watching it now, if that was influenced at all by the TV series Firefly, because that was also very much like it was a space western, and it was basically the guys who had fought on the losing side in a civil war, and now they're like so I wondered if they had consciously or unconsciously like tried to make the John Carter character here feel a little bit like Malcolm Reynolds in Firefly, where he's like, I only fight for myself now. Like, I don't care about anyone else. I lost so much. And and that comes back later, and we'll probably talk about that. But I felt like, they were trying to make it more personal for him, and I'm not sure that entirely succeeded just because there was so much other stuff going on.
Yeah, they were definitely setting up the idea of somebody coming to him and wanting him to join their cause and him saying no, so that could be a recurring sort of touchstone with the character. We can check in and see where he's at, and then when he changes that to a yes by the end, that shows character growth and creates this arc. And it's similar to what happens in the novel, but maybe slightly different. I think they were trying to define like a clearer arc for him for this film, and maybe a little bit ham-fisted at the start there. I agree, but it seems like that's what they're doing. They're laying groundwork for this arc of the character. Just in this first section, I have a couple things. I know that he has a Bond moment where he goes up to the bar and they says, "Who are you?" And he says, "Carter." John Carter. And I was like, what the fuck?
And actually, the way that scene played out didn't make a lot of sense. Right? He totally buried the lead. He's like, I have some gold, actually, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I just want to beat you guys up first. And then it's like, by the way, fuck you.
Yeah, and he got knocked out a few times, I think, in this early going too. And I thought it was going to become a recurring thing because we noticed that happened a lot in the book. And it did happen a few times here. It was interesting because, like, tonally, like we said, this movie does have sort of fun with itself, but then at times it kind of takes itself too seriously. So I think that is something that is kind of jarring at times.
As much as I said that I read that Stanton was kind of like he was out on his own, this is exactly his vision. I felt so much that they wanted this to be sort of like a Pirates of the Caribbean type franchise, like be taken seriously, but also funny, but also action filled and sort of an adventure story. And I really felt a lot of that as I watched.
Not funny enough though. It needed a long way to go before it would achieve sort of Pirates of the Caribbean 1 level of humor,
Yeah, I mean, there was no actual comic relief character for all this other stuff to play off of.
The dog?
Right? Right, which, who,
doesn't have any lines.
Was great, but didn't end up doing too much.
Yeah.
Like I will say, like this is jumping a little bit ahead, but like the Virginia stuff, they kept calling him Virginia. I found that to be pretty funny.
There were funny parts.
Yeah.
There was.
Yeah. And that was actually original. Like that wasn't in the novel at all.
Right.
That's true. And which we already introduced this element that wasn't in the novel, at least that we saw, of the Therns, right? And the way of getting transported to Mars was a little different. And so it looks like they did some stuff to try and sort of make sense of the like more magical sections of the book. This kind of touches back on what you were talking about, James, of the sort of creative control that the director had, and trying to sort of be faithful to the adaptation in a way that I think was maybe too, slavish. I wanted them to take more liberties, to update this story a little more for a modern audience. And in some ways, some of the Stern stuff, I think, was doing a little bit of that, but the main narrative still is intact, and it's it's a very much of a throwback narrative of in a patriarchal society and a woman who's going to get married off in a political marriage and like all this stuff. And it was like, in 2012, are we really wanting to see a movie about this sort of thing where it's taking place on another world? Like, be a little more imaginative. Show us something different. And you could argue that if you change too much, it's no longer a faithful adaptation, and people would be frustrated with that reason. So I'm not saying there's like an easy right answer to this, but I just wonder if maybe they could have taken a few more liberties with adapting this thing and trying to update it a little bit.
Yeah, I was watching an interview of a producer on this film, and he admitted that some of the reasons why he felt like maybe it didn't click with audiences were marketing reasons as well as multiple things. But one of the things that you kind of just mentioned was that he felt like this was an older style Hollywood epic story. Like he felt like this was sort of a, as you said, throwback for a certain era of filmmaking and films that people responded to. And I think there's probably a large group of the people who do support this movie that respond to those movies because those are the movies that they love growing up. And sort of, it is interesting because it totally is just, it seems derivative, even though it's the thing that everything seemingly came from.
Right, which is a shame, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. He also mentioned that it was very uncynical and it didn't have like, it wasn't very edgy. So sort of like this earnest, like older style adventure story kind of thing. But I feel like he's
I don't know if that's really the reason, but okay.
Yeah, I think you can be earnest and still a little more playful. Like,
Right.
I think the whole Virginia thing gets at that.
Exactly. There were moments that really worked, yeah.
I think he specifically meant like during that period of time, there was a lot of like edgy, cool, films that were coming out, and they're just like too cool for that kind of thing. Like, I don't want to be your grandpa's sci-fi story. I'm the new cool one, and
right. Mm-hmm. But that, I don't know. That just sounds like sour grapes a little bit to me. I don't know if that's really the reason that this. I don't know. Anyway, let's.
I'm just the messenger. I'm just the messenger. Okay?
I'm killing the messenger, James. You're dead.
Okay, so getting into this next section here. Because of his different bone density and the planet's low gravity, Carter is able to jump high and perform feats of incredible strength. He is captured by the green Martian Tharks and their Jedak Tars Tarkas. Elsewhere on Barsoom, the red Martian cities of Helium and Zodanga have been at war for 1,000 years. Sabthan, Jedak of Zodanga, armed with a special weapon obtained from the Thurn leader, Matai Shang, proposes a ceasefire and an end to the war by marrying the Princess of Helium, Deja Thoris. The princess escapes and is rescued by Carter. Carter, Deja, and Tarkas' daughter Sola embark on a quest to get to the end of a sacred river to find a way for Carter to get back home. They obtain information about the ninth ray, a means of using infinite energy and also the key to understanding how the medallion works. But they are later attacked by Shang's minions, the Green Martians of Warhoon.
So, I mean, just to reference the book again, like this part diverges pretty far from the original novel. Mm-hmm. But I think they're trying to pull in a lot of stuff from maybe the later books and the whole mythology of this setting. Right. I will say that Deja Thoris had a more active role,
right,
in a lot of ways, because like she was researching all the ninth ray stuff, and she was trying to do something as opposed to just like walking around and getting captured every day.
Right. And there was the pretty clear moments of them being like, she's a badass, where she would be like, no, get behind me, and that kind of thing. So like, and like, I appreciate that for what it is, you know, like they are trying to update the character to give her more agency.
Sure. And she had figured out the blue light thing, and then it malfunctions, and then the father's like, well, there's clearly nothing else we can do, so we're going to have to marry you off. And I was like, what? You just saw it almost work. Like, she's close. Get some other people in here and help her out. Like, this one guy obviously fucked with it. I mean, I thought everybody must have seen him do it, but maybe not. And I was very mad at the father in that moment, because he's like, there's just nothing else we can do.
You
just
he's
saw
like,
it.
you weren't even close, sorry. So, I mean, and that kind of gets back to what I was talking about with it like, I don't know, maybe that was just the decision to be made, but it does feel like there's not moments where it feels like the characters are like, all right, and moving the plot forward. Here we go. Mm-hmm. It's time to marry you off.
So I want to shout out the Tars Tarkin and Sola plotline here, because I really, really enjoyed it. And it felt to me like kind of jarring when they set up these characters and their interactions. And it's so interesting. And Sola is so sort of selfless in her way of helping him out and getting sort of punished for everything he's doing. I really wanted to see their relationship develop, Sola and John Carter. And it felt like as soon as Deja Thoris gets introduced, Sola is completely sidelined. And that storyline, I mean, it doesn't go nowhere, but it's no longer the focal point. And I found that interaction way more interesting. And I really wanted to see more of that. And I think Tars Tarkin, also shout out to Willem Dafoe, immediately likable. You know, just from their very first interactions, I was rooting for this character. And I love the way he was going to bat for John Carter over and over again, who didn't realize what was happening, or was just kind of being a big bull, just crashing through everything, and him having to deal with the repercussions of it. I don't know. I thought it was all fun, and that sort of culture and society was really interesting. And it reminded me of talking about Avatar. It was like you have the Avatar race, which I'm drawing a blank on what they were called.
The Na'vi.
The Na'vi, yeah. And so you set up the Na'vi, who are really interesting, but then you have another race show up that looks just like humans, and that's the one that we're more interested in. And that's kind of what happens with Deja Thoris, right? Like, with these other humanoid, like, they look like humans, they're the red humans, and that becomes the focus, and it takes away from this really interesting group of aliens that look truly alien and are truly alien. And I don't know, I just felt like that was a mistake. I wanted more of that and less of the other stuff. Although I know that's not the story that's told in the novel. So I think that's the struggle with this narrative.
Yeah, and then they add other things to kind of complicate it and set up other movies. Do you guys think that if they did cut all the additional stuff that they added to kind of set up some of the following stories, if they had stuck to the even more simplified version of this story, do you think it would have helped keep the length down and that kind of thing? Or what do you think in terms of like the things that were added? How did that help the story or harm it?
I mean, it's possible, right? Because Luke was talking about how they tried to set up this character arc for John Carter, and I think if it had been more focused on that, and we had spent more time, learning more about him as a person, like that bit of it might have worked better. And instead of jumping around and like you said earlier, James, like there's not a lot of quiet moments in this film, and it definitely felt like like you were always learning like another thing about Mars. Like, oh, by the way, there's this thing, and then we found this thing, and this is happening too, right? And it kind of it was a lot like bullet points, where it's like you need to know this and you need to know that. We're not going to tell you more about it. Because there's this next thing that we got to get to.
Mm-hmm. I to your point, Luke, I do want to say that like I think I prefer most of the major characters in the story in the film. I think they just do a good job of making them likable, updating them in ways that I think that work for the most part. So I think I do prefer most of the characters in the movie.
Interesting. I just had a lot of fun with those sections, seeing sort of the moment where they're like locking horns with each other. They're talking about like having to have someone else back them up to make this challenge. We're seeing all the stuff that Sola's going through. I don't know. Those were some of my favorite points. And I actually have it here in my notes as I was watching it. I wrote down like, oh, I'm actually having a lot of fun with this movie so far. And this was the part that I was really enjoying. And there's somewhere after this where it starts to become less interesting, and I think it starts to drag. And as we were talking about removing some of these other elements, I think there is probably 15 to 30 minutes, maybe even, of stuff that could come out of this movie to make it a tighter, more focused narrative, where there's a lot of stuff where you can sort of, like, we're all savvy viewers of entertainment at this point, and we can kind of feel what they're doing. And a lot of the times it's like you can feel that they're trying to set up future movies. You're not going to get answers to a lot of this stuff. And I think a lot of people roll their eyes at that. They're like, just tell me what's going on. This is the movie I'm watching. Give me a complete narrative. And this movie is playing too coy, I think, with some of their details. And I don't know. I do think that it suffers a little bit for that.
So moving on with the plot. After the attack, Carter is captured and taken back with Deja, while Sola is able to escape. The demoralized Deja grudgingly agrees to marry Sabthan, then gives Carter his medallion and tells him to go back to Earth. Carter decides to stay and is captured by Shang, who explains to him the purpose of the Therans and how they manipulate the civilizations of different worlds to their doom, feeding off the planet's resources in the process. Carter is able to make an escape as he and Sola go back to the Tharks, requesting their help. There, they discover Tarkus has been overthrown by the ruthless brute Tal Hagis. Tarkus, Carter, and Sola are put on a trial in a Colosseum battle with two enormous vicious creatures, the four-armed great white apes. After defeating them and killing Hagis, Carter becomes the leader of the Tharks.
Right, which was fun. It was a high action scene. The big white apes were quite large. I was kind of surprised from, compared to what they were in the book. I don't know. I thought it was pretty good. I did sort of miss our fake out, fake stabbing thing we talked about, but I know that probably wouldn't have worked in the movie. They swapped characters here. It was Tarkin instead, But it worked for the most part, and I did like that when finally the one-on-one battle was about to happen. He's like, "Let's go!" and he just chops his head off in one blow.
Yeah,
It was kind of a nice subversion of what you thought might happen there. Because John Carter's just such a badass.
This sort of Coliseum battle has been done so many times that it feels like, again, it feels a little derivative, but you can point to this maybe as a reason why we see it in sci-fi so much. But I agree. I like the fight. I like the sort of like who pledges their medal to me or whatever, and like he gets all the Tharks to join his side, and
a little corny maybe, but
a little bit.
Beyond that, it was okay. Yeah.
But I do think that like even with that cheesiness, maybe even campiness sort of feel, I think we get some of the best moments of John Carter here. Like I like seeing him actually, becoming the leader of the Tharks here and everything. I don't know. I think this is probably some of the better stuff that we see from him in the movie.
Now, is it before this when he has the big fight, which is intercut with his flashbacks?
Yes, that it is before this.
Yeah, we got to talk about that.
Because I thought that was an interesting, bit of backstory, but it wasn't closely enough linked with, I think, other bits of his backstory to really build up that part of it. But I did. I remember thinking as later when they're doing the gladiator battles, like that previous battle, which was like him and hundreds of other
10,000 Tharks or whatever.
But like in that, like you don't really see a lot of the actual action because they're making a point about he's just sort of going into a blind rage because there's all this emotional stuff happening, and then the gladiator arena thing is really the where we see a lot of him actually using certain tactics to fight people, which and to again draw comparisons to the book. Like I think Luke, you mentioned like in the book, like he would sort of say, and then we fought for an hour and I won. So like without getting into the specifics of any of the sword fighting techniques or anything. So I was kind of reminded of that in some ways.
Yeah, and that big scene, I wanted to shout out Woola for sticking with him even after he tells him to go away. I was getting a little bit of like a pit bull face for Woola. I don't know if you're picking up on that kind of pity, which I like to see. I liked Woola remarkably fast, improbably so, but sort of in a fun way though. The dog is great, and then I love that it's stuck by his side. Continues to just steal my heart. That dog.
I think the best part probably is just Woola. Very, very cool character.
Yeah.
Okay, so to get this last little section of summary out of the way here, the Thark army charges on Helium and defeats the Zodangan army by killing Sab Than, while Shang is forced to escape and leave Mars for good. Carter becomes Prince of Helium by marrying Deja. On their first night, Carter decides to stay forever on Mars and throws away his medallion. Seizing this opportunity, Shang briefly reappears and sends him back to Earth. Carter then embarks in a long quest, looking for clues of the Thurns' presence on Earth and hoping to find one of their medallions. After several years, he appears to die suddenly and asks for unusual funeral arrangements, consistent with having found a medallion, since his return to Mars would leave his Earth body in a coma-like state. He makes Burrough his protector, giving him clues about how to open the tomb. The story reverts to the present, where Burrough runs back to Carter's tomb and opens it, only to find it empty. Shang, disguised as a man with a bowler hat, who has been observing Carter, suddenly appears, having followed Burrough. But as he prepares to attack, Carter appears and kills Shang. Carter then tells Burrough that he never found a medallion. Instead, he devised a scheme to lure Thurn into revealing himself. Carter takes Shang's medallion, whispers the code, and then is transported back to Barsoom.
Oh, there we have it.
So what did you guys think of this sort of convoluted way, and like all of these setups and all this Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, and giving the the sort of the framing device? Do you think that having it be so important in the movie, do you think that this was a worthy payoff?
I mean, yes and no. Like on one level, I can understand why they chose to do it this way, but I feel like overall, if we look at this as an unsold pilot movie, then the last scene of the pilot is what the series is going to be about, right? Like that's the rule. And the last scene is him, like, outsmarting the Therns and getting back to Mars. And so to make that work, I think you would have to set up the Therns, like basically give him more screen time and explain more about, like Mark Strong's character had that one speech about how they like mess with all these different civilizations that are dying or whatever it was, right? Which was like, and I don't know, that scene was
exposition heavy.
Yeah, and I loved how John Carter during the whole thing was just kind of standing there. It's like, yeah, and then what? Okay, sure, keep going. Like he's not arguing with him or anything. Like, and I think they were trying to make his character seem like very stoic, like the strong, silent type. But in a lot of cases, it just ended up sort of making him more of a cipher. It's like, I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know what he's thinking about doing or what he wants to do or why. So I feel like, they put the Therns in there, sort of with the idea that, they're going to be sort of the big bad sort of throughout this whole thing, that eventually he's going to, John Carter's character is going to have to level up until he can actually go fight the big boss at the end. But I think in this particular story, they were just kind of like, they were very random. I felt like it's like, hey, we're going to show up and give this guy a really powerful thing. We're going to make these people do this because we said so. And like, no one really understands who they are or what they're doing.
Yeah, it felt kind of poorly explained. And they also seemed very sort of, I don't know, Emperor Palpatine, kind of just cliche villain. That they're just evil because they are. It was unclear like what the point of it all was. Why are they doing things the way they're doing them? When they say they've done this to other civilizations, like how many are we talking about? Have they been affecting Earth? It was unclear.
Right, because they knew a lot about Earth.
Yeah, I just had a lot of questions, and it felt like we were just getting a little tiny piece of it. And it, kind of frustrating in the lack of explanations we get there. And it was very clearly like, you're going to have to watch future movies to learn about this. And maybe we don't even know what we're going to set up yet, but we'll write it later. I don't know. I was getting those vibes. So yeah, in general, like the Therns, I think it was an interesting attempt to sort of up the stakes of the novel, but in some ways I think it did backfire on them a little bit.
Curtis, you mentioned something that I wanted to talk about was the moment where so this movie I've talked about a few times. Like I realized on this viewing, which is just my second time seeing it, but on this viewing I realized how much exposition it's just dumped on you and dumped on you and dumped on you.
Yep.
And there's literally a moment where they're like, all right, we're going to mobilize John Carter. He's not going to be able to speak or move. And we're going to force him to listen to heavy exposition dump.
I'm going to monologue at him.
Yeah. I'm going to monologue at him for a couple of minutes and he can't do anything about it. There's nothing like we just have to get all of this out of the way here. So I that was a moment that I just like kind of laughed at. But so in terms of like this sort of the clever way that John Carter overcomes the Therns and beats them at their own game kind of thing. I thought that I still think it's fun. Like I enjoy it for what it is. I think that it was the first time I saw it, I definitely did not see it coming that he was going to have like, devised all this in order to trick them and then go back to Barsoom. I kind of like that. Do I think that it pays? Do I think that the whole framing device needed to be set up so that he could do that last little bit there? No, but I think I do think it was fun and I don't know. It's just funny how it feels like the movie's over and then they have this whole kind of like epilogue here where he goes and does all of these things just to set up another movie. It feels like
we did get a line from the Edgar Rice Burroughs. Actually, no, it's John Carter to the Edgar Rice Burroughs character that I really liked. It was take up a cause, fall in love, write a book. And the way he said that, I was like, all right, John Carter, I will. I'm working on it. Get off my back.
Or I'll just take your book.
Yeah, there you go. How about you hand me over that manuscript?
the whole Edgar Rice Burroughs thing just kind of threw me for a loop, like from the beginning, and I don't know.
Yeah. You know, what's funny is I think I appreciated it more having just read the book, right? Like it was fresh in my mind. I was thinking about the fact that they did this framing device in the novel. But if I hadn't just read the book, I don't know that it would have landed as well for me. And like it was something that I didn't kind of bounce off of, whereas I might have otherwise. But that's probably the benefit of like reading the book right before you see a movie, which we've learned from doing this podcast. Like most people don't generally do that. It's kind of a unique way to watch something because it kind of gives us a unique view of it. I like to think.
I do have to mention off something Luke said a minute ago. My favorite cheesy line from the movie is when it's somewhere in the middle when they're in the desert and like Deja Thoris is explaining who she is to John Carter, and John Carter takes it in and he looks at her and he's like, a princess of Mars. And like I want there to be like I hope he did one take where he just like looks direct in the camera and just like does the cheesiest possible delivery of that.
Yeah.
Oh man. I'm not the hugest Family Guy fan, but there is a bit in one of the episodes where Peter said it cuts to Peter in the theater and he's like elbowing Lois. He's like, "They said the name of the movie," and I always think of that little bit whenever I see a movie that does this. So I just want that scene to be put into like any movie. They just cut to Peter Griffin. They said the name. Yeah, it was pretty funny.
So I have a couple of like little closing observations that I didn't mention.
Yeah.
If you guys want to start compiling yours.
Let's do it.
I felt that the CG in this movie, for the money that they paid, I think it looked pretty good for the most part. I thought it was solid, which is, on a technical level, like that's an achievement and like the, money well spent. I think that, it's been like 8 years now or so, and it looked really solid. There was a certain scene that I wanted to talk about. It's a scene where they're in the Thark's sort of temple area, the holy area where they're breaking the rules by being up there. That was an extremely horny scene, like super super like weirdly like way beyond what I thought would be in a Disney movie. Like I was like, what is happening here? Like this is very very very.
Oh yeah, where they're like so
provocative.
He's like sticking his arm out like around.
Yeah. And they're like showing like how big he got his arms in the gym for this role and everything.
Right.
That brings up an interesting point about how this movie at times felt almost like it was like a YA romance, but it's not. But like it's not supposed to be, and like maybe it would have worked better as that. I don't know, but then maybe you have to introduce other elements to make that work. But I don't know. In some ways, I felt like this movie had a crisis of identity. And that's the kind of thing that shows that, because it almost didn't work for this movie to have that scene. I don't know, maybe it did, but other elements needed to get in line with that more, I guess, to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that with the book too, where how it was all about how John Carter, like, he went to this other planet and fell in love, and like the whole book is basically about him like trying to get the girl.
Yeah.
I think the thing in the movie is that because it's not all from his point of view. Like, the good thing is we got to, spend time with some of the other characters in a way that didn't happen in the book. Like you were talking about Tars Tarkas and like seeing the Thark sort of live their own life, sort of independent of John Carter and whatever he was doing. But they didn't, like, in terms of the romance, I felt like they would have needed to beef up Deja Thoris's backstory, because we don't really know anything about where she came from or why she is the way she is, right? Like, how did she get into science? And, like, is she the only one working on this ninth race stuff? And, like, what is actually her normal relationship with her father when they're not, like, trying to marry her off?
Yeah. Remember when you told me that story about the stars, she says? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, like, the little taste we get. It does bring me back around to, like, how much I really wish we'd gotten more Sola. Because John Carter's motivation for everything he does, backing up Deja Thoris, is basically horniness. He's like, you're hot, I like you, we're compatible, and therefore I'm into you. And so now I'm going to, like, help you eventually, right? But, like, anything that he does for Sola, like, that's not the motivation. It's more like pity for her and the way she's been treated and justice. And, like, that interaction is so much more interesting to me because it tells me something more about John Carter than he is just like a horny dude. Which, it's so that to me, that's just way more interesting, and I wanted more of it. And I was disappointed when that whole plot line gets sort of sidelined. It does come back at the end, but it's not the focus. And I don't know, I wanted more of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys are ready, I think we should move into sort of. I know we wanted to talk about whether we prefer the movie or the book. That's something
We're
we
gonna
definitely
take our
want to
vote.
answer here. We'll take our vote here in a second. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to mention. I noticed as they got up to the gate of Is, sort of down the river Is, the giant structure looked a bit like the Millennium Falcon with like this sort of
Really?
front portion with a section taken out. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't know if
Yeah,
that was kind of a little nod to like the fact that like, Star Wars was influenced by this. Maybe this was
funny.
influenced by Star Wars, back and forth kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was
Just
getting
a
a
little
little bit of sort of Lord of the Rings vibes. Like they're trying to go for that when they're going down the river and the big ancient structures and all that.
Yeah, but when they got there, and I think Deja Thors is like, I've never seen anything like this before. I'm like, and I was thinking, yeah, it's too bad you don't have airships that could like fly over everywhere on the planet and see stuff. How is that not a thing?
Are we ready to get into our votes, or do we have anything else we want to get into here before we move to this sort of final capping it off? Oh, actually, I do. I just remembered. I have a correction for last week. You asked me, Curtis, when he wrote Tarzan, and I threw out like 1917 or something, which was wrong. It was concurrent. He actually published the first Tarzan story the same year that he published the first John Carter story. Yeah, 1912. Wow. So he
wild.
started writing them both. He ended up went on to write, I think, 24 Tarzan novels. Obviously selling like hotcakes, So I just wanted to, correct that. I got that wrong on the episode. So yes, they were written concurrently, it seems like, and both huge successes, and came out the same year apparently. So yeah, there you go.
And Disney made a Tarzan animated movie, like
99.
99? Okay.
Yeah. Nice pull. I didn't know that. I think I've seen it, maybe. So we mentioned last episode that one of the things we're going to try out this year is we're going to try out at the end of a project, weighing in. Each of us is going to take a vote. We'll go around and we're going to save the guest for last. We're going to vote on whether or not we felt like, if we had to pick one, was the book or the movie better. So we're going to do that now, and we're doing it essentially to invite people to sort of give us feedback online, weigh in on whether or not they agree, disagree, give us their reasons why. We just ask that you try and be respectful in the comments. Don't attack anybody for having a different opinion. It's all in fun. Obviously there's nothing definitive here, but just in our opinions, what we thought was better. And do you want me to start? Do you want to start, James? Or how we want to kick this off?
I'll
Okay,
start
you
real
start
quick.
it off.
So my answer's quick and easy. I choose the movie. I think that I like the things that they updated, as much as I felt that there was some stuff that definitely could have been cut out. And I think that like under maybe different direction, under different circumstances, maybe with, more reshoots as the director was more accustomed to, we could have got some more of the culture, maybe some more unique looking. I do think we got some unique looking cities, but maybe some more like unique moments in those unique looking cities. And overall, I just think that like as I was talking about before, I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the updates of the characters. And I think this is a pretty solid adaptation of the original work. I think that it maybe I would put it basically just on par, but because I have to choose, I'm going to put it just above the book. So I choose movie.
Okay. So I struggled with this one. We're starting off the year with a difficult choice. I have a feeling we're going to have more of these in our future. And I was kind of kicking myself like, why did I agree to do this? 'Cause it's tough, and you feel like you're going on record with something that you don't feel strongly about. And really what made it tough is I enjoyed this movie in general. I had more fun with it, which I know I feel like I've been being very critical in this coverage, but I did have fun watching this movie for the most part. And because of that, it made it a very difficult choice. And I looked at both of these, the book and the movie, and I felt like both have flaws for me. Flaws galore. And the movie, we've outlined them all in this episode, or I feel like I've weighed in on most of mine. Last episode, we talk about the book in a lot of the ways that it doesn't really jive for me as sort of a modern audience for it. So when it came down to it, I had to go with the historical relevance of the original book and how important it was for sci-fi in the modern age. And so I had to sort of give it like history points and realize that because I'm reading it 100 years later, that's introducing some problems, that I probably wouldn't have had if I had read it at the time. So while I think both are flawed, and I wouldn't say either of them is like a favorite of mine, I wouldn't give anything 5 stars or any of that. I came down to it. I am going to vote for the book. So we're starting off the year right? Like you go with the movie, I go with the book, right? So
for the sake of argument, I almost gave it to the book for just sheer legacy as well. Like I almost did it, but I was like, you know what? I this time through, I think I had more fun watching this movie than I did reading this book. So that's what I give it this time.
So we would have started with a split decision if it had been our typical guest-free episode. But since we have a guest, we have a tiebreaker. Curtis, explain your thinking and let us know what you voted for.
All right. So, I mean, I'll just tell you my vote first and then explain.
Okay.
Cool.
So I also would vote for the book over the movie, and it's for a lot of the reasons that Luke cited, which is, I mean, I guess you could say some of them are more academic in terms of, like, as a science fiction writer myself, like it was really interesting to see, this primary source that's influenced a lot of other, creators since it came out. But that said, I mean, I enjoyed the movie, both times I saw it. It's not a terrible movie. Like, it's well made. They made some odd choices, I think, narratively. But they definitely, had an idea of what they wanted to do. And I think in a lot of ways were successful with that. But the book as just sort of, it's a window into a different age for me, just to see like what the writing style is like, and like it's actually not, it's not as bad as maybe some other stories from around the same times in terms of how, the attitudes are maybe dated, or like it's still like, it's not great, right?
Yeah, it's damning with faint praise, but you're right. Like, it's not quite as bad as some of the other stuff.
Like, it's and it's, sort of very typical, I guess, of, I think, the adventure fiction, like pulp fiction of the time, which was a really big thing back in the day. So for me as a writer, it was interesting to read this and see, what writers were doing back then. And also, I think the first 3 novels are in the public domain in the U.S. So you can like download them from Project Gutenberg. You don't have to pay anything to get the ebook. So you can just kind of like flip through them and see stuff. And in terms of, things that it has influence, like it's, reading the book sort of gave me a new perspective on a lot of the things that, I've read and seen, myself in my lifetime. We mentioned a bunch of these last week in terms of books, like the Martian Chronicles and a lot of different Mars stories. And one in particular I want to shout out that's on the air now is the Supergirl TV show, which has the Martian Manhunter on it, which is a character from DC Comics. And like the whole DC Mars mythology is very similar to the Barsoom thing in that like it's a dying planet and they're green Martians and white Martians and they're at war, and but it's fun to see how they've sort of taken some of those ideas and developed them and what they're doing with them now on the show. And like Supergirl's it's a really fun show. And, I know it may not seem like something like important, but they get a little ridiculous now and then. But
do you watch like all of those ones that connect together for all the big? I know they're doing like that big event currently, right?
The Crisis on Infinite Earths, yeah,
right.
yeah. No, they're really into the crossovers right now, which is interesting. Like I feel like it's starting to get a little out of hand. But it is fun to see how they Yeah.
After a while, like I had to drop Arrow after like 4 or 5 seasons. I couldn't do it anymore. And then Flash, I dropped after like 3, and I couldn't keep up anymore.
Yeah. No, yeah, same here. Yeah, but I'm still enjoying Supergirl. I'm watching Batwoman now also. I feel like it's important to support those shows in particular.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and I watched like the first season of Legends, which was just like flat out ridiculous.
Yeah,
Like,
it was kind of fun in a fun way. I watched the first season of Legends. It was pretty good.
Okay.
Anyway,
but yeah,
Beside the point.
So I will say that, like, in terms of you guys, you took Curtis, you took the split decision and decided the book on this one. And I have no qualms with that. I think this is a good one to choose the book for. I was kind of like, I really didn't have a horse in the race. I was like, you know what, either way.
No,
I think the legacy of the book.
The moral here is to know that you were wrong, James. That's what you did.
Yeah, I should be shamed.
You should be ashamed of your vote.
Yeah. Correct.
It'll be interesting to see when the two of you flip. So like, Luke likes the movie when James likes the book better.
That will be interesting for sure. Because I feel like what's going to happen more often will be we both like the book, or I like the movie and he likes the book.
Maybe
it'll be interesting.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm really curious to see how this plays out, and I hope that it ends up being sort of a net positive. I know that it can be controversial when you take like a hardline stance or something, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah. But yeah, we really enjoyed having you on for this entire project, Curtis. This has been a lot of fun discussing all this with you. And I just wanted to give you another chance to talk about what you got going on, what you got coming out, that sort of stuff, so that if people enjoyed listening to you on this podcast, they can look for your work in the future.
And where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks. No, this has been really great. So thanks again for inviting me. I've had a blast doing this. I am online. I have a website, curtiscchen.com, and that links to all my other stuff, like Facebook, Twitter. The next thing that's coming out is Machina, as I mentioned, on Serial Box. And after that, in a couple months, I think, is going to be the second season of Ninth Step Station on Serial Box. That's a same kind of thing. It's a collaboratively written serial story, and this one is a near future police drama set in Tokyo. And it's a little cyberpunky. So both of those are very science fictional. And I've got a couple of short stories coming out later this year. I don't know the dates exactly, but those will all be on my website. I'll be tweeting about them. I'm at Curtis C. Chen. It's 3 C's, except no substitutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, don't you also run the Puzzled Pint thing? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so Puzzled Pint is a monthly event. It's happening now in something like 80 cities in 13 countries around the world.
Wow, I didn't know it was that big.
Yeah, it's kind of grown beyond our wildest expectations. It's a free event. If it's happening in your city, you go to puzzledpint.com and see if it is. It's the second Tuesday of the month. You go to a bar with your friends and solve different kinds of like logic puzzles, word puzzles.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You can see all of our past archive puzzles on the website and try some of them out. And what else was I going to say? We are a 501c3 now, public charity. So we are working on sort of looking to the long term. So this July will be our 10th anniversary of Puzzle Pint existing.
Wow. Congrats.
Which is a long time. Yeah, thanks. But it started us thinking about, okay, like a lot of people are into this. We really want to make sure it keeps going. So how do we make this organization sustainable? And if people want to help out either if you just want to play, if you want to run a Puzzle Pint in your city, if you just want to, try out some of the puzzles or, donate money to help us pay for, website costs and whatever else, you can go to puzzlepint.com and get all the info there.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Well, Curtis, it has been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
All right, I will see you at the next write-in, but thanks a lot, Curtis.
All right.
All right, so one final time, the giveaway. If you would like to enter to win Waypoint Kangaroo and Kangaroo 2 by Curtis, send us an email, subject line Kangaroo, that's the code word, and you're going to enter to win those signed copies, also the codes as described in the episode. So definitely send us those emails. We're going to announce the winner on Monday following the release of this, which comes out on Thursday. So the following Monday, you have through the weekend, but try and get those emails in. I'm going to send out the announcement on Monday. So make sure to get them in, and hopefully you win. Good luck.
We want to say thank you to our patrons who funded this episode by using their tokens, by putting their tokens towards it. It was Steve E., Ben E., and Chris C. Thank you again to those three for, literally picking this project and forcing us to do it. We appreciate it, and it was fun. I enjoyed doing it. I knew this was one we would eventually do, so put a little check mark next to that one on the list.
Yeah. You guys took us on a journey to Barsoom, and we appreciate it. If you would like to find out how to become a patron yourself, even find out how you could commission a project of your own, go to patreon.com/inktofilm, and you can see all the different tiers we have on there, the different things we're offering. We have tiers as low as $1 a month, so check it out and see what we're offering.
Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those adding to film. And join our Council of Inklings. We recently posted a poll on there, which is decided our Minority Report the next project that we're covering will be Minority Report because of that poll. So definitely check that out. We also post any sort of adaptation news we see and just overall podcast related things in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just posted news about like the new Altered Carbon Season 2 launch date was announced today. Stuff like that. Poll, as mentioned, we're going to be doing Minority Report by Philip K. Dick and directed by Steven Spielberg next week. If you would like to get in on those votes, join that Council of Inklings on Facebook. I know that a lot of people are leaving Facebook for good reason, but I do know some people who have left their accounts active just for the group feature, and the group feature on there is pretty good. That's one of the things I'll give Facebook, is that I like the group feature. So maybe do that if you're a Facebook. If you don't like Facebook, at least you could just join the group. Check it out. And as we said, if you liked this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever podcast app you use. That would really help boost our signal and get more listeners, which is one of our goals.
Thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it for Edgar Rice Burroughs until we tackle Tarzan down the road. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
But that's it for now. I had a lot of fun on Barsoom. I feel like I know more about the sci-fi genre, so I appreciate this coverage. And I've seen this movie now that I can't believe how much money they spent on it. It's pretty astounding.
Honestly, this has been a nice little primer for Dune. I think this has gotten me even more excited for Dune.
Yeah, well, let's hope that Dune is better.
A different kind of movie than this. Yeah.
Yeah, let's hope so. But like I said, I didn't hate this movie. I had fun with it. So those out there who really like this movie, I understand why. I see it, and I can see why people would really like this movie. But yeah, that's gonna be it for us. We hope you come back next week, sci-fi fans, for Minority Report. Oh, and if you aren't really into sci-fi and you're still listening, we are going to be covering Water for Elephants following that. So stick around for that. It should be an interesting project, another commissioned project for us.
Yeah, but until next time.
Thanks for listening.